After selling the company for $66 million, I threw a retirement party. Just before the toast, I saw my daughter-in-law slip something into my champagne. While she wasn't looking, I switched glasses. After she finished drinking, a few minutes later, she started to vanish inch by inch. My name is Margaret Hale, and I am 68 years old. I wear a small silver locket with a photograph of my late husband, and I keep my house clean enough that sunlight feels welcome. I have a soft spot for lemon cake and steel-backed chairs. My hands are not dainty. They carried files, took out trash, signed payroll, rubbed a toddler's back through fevers, and once held a stranger's bleeding wrist against a curb. I do not raise my voice if I can raise a boundary instead. I built my business from my kitchen table. It began with a spiral notebook, a secondhand laptop that ran hot, and a shoebox of invoices. It grew into a logistics software firm that tracked shipments and cleaned up messes other people ignored. I learned to trust paper and dates and signatures more than promises. I kept deals plain and the books plainer. When I signed the sale, I did it in quiet shoes, and then I took my grandchildren out for pie. The ballroom smelled of citrus from the champagne and that waxy vanilla that clings to cake frosting. I stood near the head table, steadying the stem of the champagne flute that should have been mine. Across the room, my daughter-in-law's smile flickered like a dying bulb. She had slipped something into a flute as the band tuned up and the photographer leaned in for a shot. I had nudged the glasses and made the switch with a quick, practiced flick of the wrist, as smooth as leaving a train and catching another. Now she sipped and laughed and sipped again. Her throat worked, her eyes glassed. She set her hand on the white linen and missed the edge. People think wealth is noise. It is not. It is quiet and watching. I watched her pupils dilate. I watched her face grow pale under the powder she wore too heavy. The citrus bite left my own tongue. I could smell the thick sweetness of the cake and the starch of the pressed napkins. The bubbles in the room rose and popped. Toasts waited. I held the flute that should have ended me, and I held it like a small witness, cool and guiltless in my hand. The photographer crouched. Someone's perfume drifted by, floral and sharp. The band tried a bright horn run. My son laughed at something a partner said, and then looked back at me, warm and proud. My daughter-in-law touched the table again and caught only air. For one hard second, I saw the girl she had been, hopeful and hungry, and then I saw the woman she had become, mean and hungry. Her name is Cassie Hale. She swallowed, blinked slow, and reached for the edge of the tablecloth to pull herself upright. The horn blared a final test note and broke against the ceiling. She swayed hard. I moved before the murmurs turned to questions. I set my champagne flute near the cake, careful not to smudge the glass, and took her elbow. Her skin was cool and damp, and it made my palm cold. The band slid into the first song and strummed false cheer. The room's double doors stood open. An October draft slipped under my dress hem and wrapped my ankles. I guided her toward a chair in the corner and lowered her into it, my hands steady, my voice calm. My son was across the floor, still laughing with a cluster of executives. The photographer's flash popped, and white spots hovered like moths at the edge of my sight. Her head tilted and came back. Her breath carried a faint bitterness under the champagne, like crushed pills dissolved in a sour drink. She tried to smile at me and failed. I leaned into the cool shadow of the drapes. I did not want a scene, but I wanted witnesses. A little cluster formed anyway, curious and useless. The table linen felt warm where the champagne had puddled earlier, and the lace edge curled like a burned paper. I slipped my phone from my bag and angled it low. Two identical flutes sat close together on the linen, faint condensation rings pressed like fingerprints around their bases. I took a single photo. Then I pocketed the phone and turned to the maitre d'. "Call an ambulance now." My voice was gentle. He heard me. He moved. He had seen enough drunk uncles and fallen brides to know the difference. I took the flute I had been holding and slid it into my bag, wrapped in a folded napkin to protect the surface. My daughter-in-law gripped the chair with both hands and tried to stand. Her knees unlocked and then locked again. Guests kept their distance the way people do around accidents and sin. I felt the draft again on my ankles and knew the front steps were bare and cold. Outside, as if on cue, a sound gathered and came up the street, thin at first, and then a ribbon tightening. The siren I called for wailed closer. The hospital air had a bite that cut through my nose. Antiseptic and something chalky lived on the surface of everything. The light was flat and did not care. I checked in with my name, and the words felt heavy and official in my mouth. I had tucked the champagne flute deep in my bag, wrapped in the napkin, and then sealed it in a zipper bag I kept for loose earrings and hard candies. It lay there like a message in a bottle, quiet and exact. There was enough liquid left in the bowl for testing. My daughter-in-law had been wheeled behind a curtain on a rolling bed. The wheels squeaked once and then went silent. I kept things small and orderly while I waited. I smoothed my skirt, I shifted my locket, and felt the cool oval settle against my skin. I could still taste the citrus if I thought about it, the tiny sting on the back of my tongue. The waiting room television showed a travel show with beaches that looked vague. Someone coughed, a child wailed, then stopped. Two nurses moved past with a cart of wrapped syringes. At the desk, I asked for a toxicology screen under my name. The clerk blinked up at me. I slid the zipper bag forward and explained, plain and brief, that it had been my glass, then not my glass. I asked that the test be tied to me, to my birth date, to my driver's license, paper dates, signatures. The nurse who came to take the bag had soft hands and did not look surprised. She marked the label and sealed it into another bag. I watched every step the way I watched loading docks in winter storms and contracts before holidays. I asked for a copy of the chain of custody form. She gave me one, and the ink was still faintly damp. I held it until it dried. The show on the television ended. The next show began. I sat with my bag on my knees. The zipper bag with the glass was gone now, somewhere in the bowels of the hospital. And that was good. It meant the process had started and could not be placed back in anyone's purse or pocket. It meant the story had left the room. The sliding doors at the far end of the hall whooshed open for a gurney and then closed again. The clock on the wall made no sound at all, but time moved anyway. A nurse stopped beside me, looked at her board, and said the lab could rush it. The fluorescence hummed in the corridor, a thin sound that worked its way into my head. I sat on one of the plastic chairs and kept my hands still. My son came down the hall with his tie in his fist and his hair pushed back hard like he had tried to pull the night out of it. His face looked both young and worn. He sat beside me and breathed in like a man who had just finished a race. He looked at my bag and then at my hands and then at the floor. He did not know where to put his eyes. "Mom, what happened?" He said it soft, but the words had corners. I turned the locket in my fingers until the hinge sat under my thumb. I kept my voice even and slow. I told him I would explain with papers, not guesses, and that he would look at the papers with me. I told him the night was not a room to argue in. He hated that. I watched it flicker across his face. He loved me, and he loved her, and he wanted everything to be true at once. Truth is not a crowd. A curtain rattled on its rings. The antiseptic smell drifted stronger for a second and then weakened. A cart squeaked and stopped again. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, and I rested my hand lightly between his shoulder blades. He was taller than his father and wore the same long fingers. His tie fell to the floor and lay like a fallen ribbon. He did not pick it up. Behind the curtain, she groaned my name. To me, everything was clear. She spiked my toast. I was about to spike her future. No tears, no speeches, just cameras, lab slips, and a judge. She wanted a victim. She picked the wrong grandmother. But before we continue with my payback, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are now. I arrived at the restaurant before the doors opened. The hallway to the back office smelled like old coffee and lemon sanitizer. The manager, a careful man with a keyring heavy enough to drag at his belt, led me past stacks of folded napkins and racks of clean glasses. He knew my name from the party bill. He had a clipboard and the patient look of someone who had seen enough weddings to write a quiet book about them. I kept my hands folded around my bag. The zipper teeth felt cool under my fingers. My silver locket lay flat and steady against my chest. He unlocked a door and clicked on a lamp that hummed like a tired fly. The office was the size of a pantry. Two monitors showed a frozen view of last night's floor. Balloons hung like pale moons at the edges. He slid a fresh USB stick from a drawer and set it on the desk. It was small and black with a silver swivel. He typed in a date and a time, and the screen jumped back to the long white table near the cake. I saw my dress, my son's head tilted in laughter, my daughter-in-law at the rim of the crowd. The camera angle looked down over the bar with no mercy. I leaned in. The resolution was better than I expected. Even the condensation on the glass showed against the linen. He clicked play. I watched her reach for a flute. I watched her look over her shoulder. The bartender turned to the cooler at the same moment. She cupped her palm over the rim and then dipped, quick and clean. It was a practiced motion, like snapping a hair tie. She set the flute down and moved it an inch. I watched my own hand enter the frame minutes later and shift the glasses. The room's happy noise floated thin and far through the office speakers. Something in me went still, the way a lake goes still when the wind stops. I kept my voice calm. I asked him to clip the segment and stamp the time. He did it without comment. He added a copy of the camera map and the equipment model, and he printed a short certification page for himself to sign. He slid it across, and the paper was warm from the machine. I signed for receipt. I opened my bag, took out the red leather folder I kept for documents that could ignite a life, and placed the USB and the certification inside. The folder's edge had a small scratch at the corner from years ago. I smoothed it with my thumb and closed the clasp. He watched me put the folder away. He had the right kind of caution. He did not ask for a story. He did not offer a smile. A faint scent of coffee rose from a cold mug on a coaster. He tapped the keyboard and rewound, checked the timestamp, and saved another copy for his records. Then he said the one thing I needed and nothing more. You can see her hand cover the rim. We also caught the whisper. He handed me the USB and a second printout with the audio log and said there was audio too. The lab called mid-morning. I drove over and parked in the visitor slot beside a hedge that smelled faintly like cut cucumbers. Inside, the air had that chalky bite I remembered from the night before. The receptionist handed me a numbered badge and nodded me through to a small office off the main corridor. A woman in a blue coat waited with a folder. She set it on the desk. The paper in it smelled faintly of warm ink and wet paper. She had soft, neat hands. She checked my driver's license and the chain of custody number I had copied at the hospital. Every square matched. That steadied me more than I expected. The report was plain. Crushed sedatives in solution. Ethanol, a mix that turns a body mean and slow and then makes it forget. The numbers sat on the page in black print that did not flinch. My name was at the top. The champagne glass was listed by bag number with the date and time. The test method was listed, the machine model, the technician's initials. I read it twice, tracing lines with the corner of my nail, then lifted the paper to see if the ink had stained through. It had not. Precision does not bleed. She gave me a sealed duplicate for my records. I slipped both the duplicate and the copy of the chain of custody into my red leather folder. The folder had weight now. I could feel it change the way my bag sat against my hip. That was good. A heavy folder like that is a kind of brace for the spine. It lets you stand straighter. I asked about retrieval, if the court needed the original and what the time window would be. She explained it cleanly. The lab would hold the remainder for a set period. The originals would remain sealed. All requests would run through the number on my form. The corridor outside was bright and flat. My shoes made a quiet sound against the floor. I felt the locket shift as I stood and settled back again. I thanked her. I did not try to explain anything. I did not try to soften it. Softness is for babies and bread. I had neither in my hands. I opened my bag, slid the red leather folder inside, and closed the zipper with a steady pull, teeth against teeth. The room smelled lightly of hand soap and printer toner. As I reached for my badge, the woman asked if I wanted them to print an extra copy for the police. My attorney's conference room was long and pale, with a table that held sunlight in clean strips. The blinds threw ladder shadows up the wall. The air smelled faintly of floor polish and the coffee someone had carried in earlier and set aside. I placed the red leather folder on the table and opened it. The USB glinted black. The lab report lay on top with the certification page and the chain of custody copy. He read in silence. He had the habit of tapping the bottom right corner of a page when something satisfied him. He tapped more than once. This was not the first hard conversation we had shared in that room. He had helped me sell the company and helped me rewrite the trust when my husband died. He knew the way my mind liked to stack and label. He took a yellow pad and wrote 3 words at the top. He drew a small box and a smaller one beside it. He reached for the flash drive, slid it into his laptop, and watched the clipped file without sound. He made a notation for the equipment model and asked for the manager's certification sheet. I handed it over. He read it slowly, then set it under the lab report and uncapped his pen. He looked at me. I held my locket between thumb and forefinger, settling it again against my skin. My voice stayed level. I told him I did not want a show. I wanted process. I wanted a line. He nodded as if he had already written that down somewhere years ago. Then he rested the pen and spoke the only sentence that needed saying. We do this by the book. He underlined a date, circled it hard, and wrote the courthouse name beside it. He went through steps with the same care I had used in shipping season when trucks were stacked out to the highway. Temporary order first. Police report, with every page of the lab packet attached. Notice to the restaurant to preserve all camera footage for 30 days. Letter to the hospital confirming the chain of custody. He brought out a template for a protective order. He explained the standard and the options. He marked the place where a judge could limit contact not just with me, but with anyone in my household, including my grandson. He checked my phone service plan to make sure call recordings could be downloaded if needed. He wrote down the officer's name on duty last night from the intake log I had kept. I signed where he pointed. The pen left a smooth, thin line I trusted. He made 2 stacks, originals and copies. The originals went into a blue folder for filing that afternoon. The copies went back into my red leather folder. He added the manager's certification and the audio log. He printed an extra sheet listing evidence items by label and number. He wrote the list twice, one for him, one for me. He told me to take the long way to my car and to watch the mirrors. He told me to call him before I spoke to anyone else with the last name I had once been so happy to share. I slid the red leather folder into my bag. It felt even heavier. He capped his pen and closed his laptop. The room seemed quieter when the fan stopped. The sunlight had shifted along the table so that one stripe rested over the circled date. He circled the date for a protective order hearing. I went home and put on water for tea. The kettle sat old and clean on the stove. The kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner and the last of last night's cake, which I had brought home and tucked under a glass dome. I set my bag on the oak table and took out the red leather folder. The clasp clicked open. I placed the folder on a tea towel so the leather would not nick on the wood. I cleared a space and brought out what mattered next. The file box where I kept bank statements and receipts, monthly in order, tabs in my handwriting. Paper answers better than memory when someone starts kicking at the door. I pulled the statements for the last 3 months and spread them along the table. The paper rasped dry under my fingers. The column of transactions ran down like fence posts on a long road. I traced with a pencil. I looked for the snag. It jumped up at me in plain type. Emergency locksmith. Charged 2 weeks ago, early afternoon, while I had been at the dentist. A service call to my address. A second line, the next day. Smaller, tagged as rekey attempt. I felt my mouth go the way it goes when you put a lemon slice on your tongue. Not a surprise, not a shock, just the body naming the taste. I put both statements into the red leather folder behind the lab report. I checked the family calendar. I checked the neighbor's text thread. A message sat there from the day of the charge, a note about a van in the driveway with the word keys painted on the side and the back doors open. I printed the thread and slid the page into the folder. I went to the safe in the hall closet and ran my fingers along the edge of the door. The metal felt cool and dull. I looked at the lock plate. A faint, bright circle marked new wear around the keyhole, the kind a new tool makes when it slips. The sight went as clean through me as the lab printout. I set the kettle back on its burner and turned off the gas. On the counter lay a small stack of mail I had not yet opened. I thumbed through. A bill for mulch, a catalog, an invoice in a plain white envelope from a locksmith company with a name that sounded like a promise. The paper smelled faintly of damp glue and cheap ink. The invoice listed a service call, a drill bit, a fee for no entry, and a suggestion for a follow-up visit with a supervisor. It had my address and a smear of dark fingerprint along the corner. I put it into the red leather folder. The folder swelled a little at the spine. The house felt different now. Not unsafe, just awake. I moved through rooms and put small things back where I liked them. The locket box on the dresser, the phone charger straight, the extra keys on the hook. I saw what was mine and what had been reached for. I stacked the bank statements with the invoice and the printout and the neighbor text. I sharpened a pencil and wrote the date on a small sticky note and pressed it to the invoice. The kettle clicked as the water cooled. I did not want tea anymore. I wanted quiet. In a list, I closed the red leather folder and slid it back into my bag. The bag felt firm at my hip. I stood very still for a beat and listened to the house breathe. Then from inside my bag, where I had set the phone to charge, a chime rose like a small bell and hung in the air. A fraud alert pinged my phone. 2 hours had passed. I heard her heels before I saw her. They clicked just a shade too loud for my kitchen, a room made for socks and slippers. When she stepped in, perfume covered the air like a lid, but underneath it I smelled stale wine from last night. The kettle steamed and ticked on the stove. My oak table sat between us, set the way I liked it. 2 mugs, 2 napkins, the red leather folder closed and square in the middle. My locket rested cool at the base of my throat. I kept my hands folded the way I used to when a freight carrier tried to push past a delivery window. Calm hands mean a calm mind. She did not sit. She chose height instead, hips against the counter, chin lifted. "You're turning my husband against me," she said. The words were thin but sharp. I noted the choice. She made me the actor and herself the victim. That is a familiar trick. I opened the red leather folder. I did not speak yet. I slid out the single photo from the restaurant, the one with the 2 identical flutes sitting like twins on the linen. Condensation rings showed around the bases. Her hand, hovered in the frame from earlier, caught mid-motion on the video. I set the photo on the table and turned it so the light from the window fell over it. I added the lab report on top, not to hide it, but to make her lift the paper. People feel weight. Paper can weigh more than words. She stared. She did not reach. The kettle sighed. I shut it off and left it where it was. I took out my phone and laid it beside the papers. I opened the thread I had saved, the one where she had written to a friend. "She's been an anchor for too long, so tonight's the night." There were emojis after it, little party hats. I did not need those. The line did the work. I tilted the screen toward her. I watched her mouth go pinched. "No," she said, this is twisted. "I was fixing your glass. The bartender was at the cooler," I said. My voice surprised me with how even it stayed. "Your hand covered the rim. You moved the glass. I moved it back later. We will let the video and the lab speak." She tried to smile. It wobbled. "You don't want to hurt our family. Think about your grandson." I thought of him every day. I thought of the way he held my finger when he was small. I thought of the way he looked at the lemon cake last night, and asked if the frosting was real. I thought of my son who stood between 2 lives and wanted both to win. I did not think about bargains made at kitchen tables without papers. I pushed the photo and the report a little closer. "Sit," I said. "Drink tea." "Read, then decide how you want to handle this. You can call a lawyer, you can call mine, you can leave, but the next calls will not be to my son." She sat because the chair was behind her knees and her legs had run out of ideas. The perfume in the room thinned, and for a moment I smelled only steam and old lemon cleaner from the counter. She read the first page. Her eyes ran faster over the numbers in the machine model and slowed at my name. Her throat moved. She read the second page. She touched the photo with one finger and moved it a fraction of an inch, like moving a piece on a board and realizing the rules had changed overnight. "You can't do this to us," she said. It came out soft, almost a plea. "I am not doing this to you," I said. "You did this to yourself." I tapped the phone screen with the edge of a nail. "And you wrote it down." Her face changed by degrees, like a dimmer switch turned the wrong way. Anger first, then calculation, then something like surprise at her own limit. The window light laid a pale strip across her cheek and showed me the makeup settling into small lines she never let herself see. I kept my breathing slow. I did not let my hands move. Inside, I counted to 10 and then back. Decisions are better after numbers. When she lifted her eyes to mine, the room felt as quiet as a courtroom at 10 in the morning. The steam faded to a faint hiss. The color left her face. The precinct looked built to survive storms that never came. The walls were a weary beige, scrubbed and nicked. The wooden bench under me felt tacky with old polish that never quite dried. The air ran dry across my teeth when I spoke. I signed in with my driver's license and spelled my name twice. The officer at the window had kind eyes and a pen that clicked too often. He slid me a form and a clean-lined statement page. I opened my bag and set the red leather folder on the counter. It made a neat, soft sound as it landed. That sound always calmed me. It meant there was a plan inside. I laid out the order of things, the way I would lay out pallet placements, video first, then the lab report, then the chain of custody page from the hospital, then the photo from the party, then the printed texts. I gave him the manager's certification sheet and the audio log. He read each page. He looked up at me once. "Ma'am, start from the beginning," he said. I did. I did not guess at motives. I did not color the edges. I gave times, I gave names, I gave the make of the camera and the bag number on the glass. When I finished, the pen clicking had stopped. "We'll take it from here," he said. That was the first time I let my lungs fully fill. He called the property room. He called the hospital lab and read the chain of custody number. He asked for the sealed bag to be transferred to the station. I waited. A clock I could not see ticked anyway. A courier arrived from the hospital with a box and a clipboard. I followed the officer down a hall to a window with mesh wired into the glass. I watched the box get open, the tape cut, the evidence bag lifted out with gloved hands. My bag number matched. My name matched. The champagne flute looked smaller in the clear plastic than it had in my kitchen. He read out the numbers again to the camera in the corner and placed the sealed bag on a tray. The property clerk wrote the record and slid a printed tag across for the officer to attach. The stapler on the counter made a heavy sound that echoed up into my ribs. I felt my locket shift against my skin like a nod. The officer turned back to me. He typed, printed, typed again. Then he slid a small white card under the window. He had stamped my name onto it and written a case number in blue ink. He took my business card and stapled a copy of the report number to it. He handed both back. "You'll be contacted by the detective assigned," he said. Behind him, the clock hands ticked into the next minute. He stapled the report number to my card. The next morning, I met the manager at the bank. Banks have their own weather. This one held cool air and the smell of oil from the doors and of paper warming through a machine. The carpet muted every sound so that even my own heels seemed to hesitate. The manager met me in the lobby and led me to a glass room where a notary sat with a journal and a stamp the size of a fist. I set the red leather folder on the table. I opened it and took out the trust documents I had drafted years ago when grief was new, and my hands shook when I signed. They did not shake now. They were steady from work. The manager read the amendment I had prepared with my attorney. He moved a finger down the paragraphs like a slow clock hand. The notary watched me with the patience of a nurse. I signed the page that removed my daughter-in-law from any line of benefit and clarified that my grandson's distributions would be controlled by a third-party trustee until he reached a set year. Grandmothers pick years based on bones and weather. Lawyers pick them based on precedent. We met in the middle. The notary slid the journal to me and had me sign and write my driver's license number. Then she raised the stamp and brought it down. The metal thunk landed in my chest like a bar sliding into place. "Are you certain?" the manager asked. He did not sound doubtful. He sounded like a man who had watched families crack along money lines and knew the earthquake map by heart. "Yes," I said. "This protects the child. It protects me. It keeps the heat where it belongs." He nodded. He stood and shook out his sleeves as if to clear dust I could not see. He made copies of the updated pages while I placed the originals into my red leather folder. The folder accepted them with the same quiet weight it had accepted the lab report. He returned with the copies and set them in a neat stack. "We will update the beneficiary records today," he said. "It will take effect when you leave the building." That was the sentence I needed. We moved to a different desk for the separate account. I gave my son's name and his address. The clerk, a young woman with tidy nails, entered each letter carefully. I felt a small ache then, deep and old, for the days when he was a boy and a new account meant a coin bank shaped like a bear. Life does not come with banks like that anymore. It comes with paperwork, and we either learn to hold the pen or we let someone else hold it for us. I watched the balance transfer from one screen to another. The numbers slid cleanly. There is a beauty to that when you have been alive long enough to see balances do worse things. The manager returned with a thick notepad of checks. He pulled one and verified the account name. He printed the amount from my instruction. He turned the screen so I could see the confirmation. He asked if I wanted a memo line. I said yes and told him what to write. "Household security," I said. It was plain truth. He nodded and typed. The printer rattled and released the check into a tray, fresh and warm. The smell of toner and a faint, hot metal edge rose up. I signed where he placed a red arrow and felt the sting in my hand that always comes with money. Not regret, not fear, just the body knowing the weight of a decision. He slid the newly stamped copies of the trust amendment back to me, and I put them in the red leather folder. He asked if I wanted a safe deposit box. I said yes. He walked me to a vault door I had passed 100 times and never used. He turned a key and then another. He showed me a small drawer that could hold wills and photos and a locket if I ever needed to rest it. I did not put the locket in. Some things belong on the skin. We walked back to the glass room. His shoes did not make a sound on the carpet. He shook my hand like a man who respected a fence well built. As I gathered my bag and folder, I watched him write a note to the teller line. He lifted his chin to the clerk, and in a quiet voice that did not carry, the manager prepared a cashier's check for my son's separate account. The deputy parked at the curb with a grim exactness that suited the paper in his breast pocket. The afternoon had grown bright and too hot for the month. Her lawn smelled of cut grass and gasoline, sharp and green. A lawn service had just left, lines laid like a pattern on the ground. She came out in sunglasses and a sweater she would not need for another 6 weeks. She saw the uniform, not me. Her mouth opened and shut. The deputy asked her name and verified an address. He spoke in a clean, flat tone that cut through the broad day. He read the order. He handed her the paper. She held it by the corner as if it were burnable. The pink copy went to me. I had a clipboard in my bag and a pen. I made my signature small and clear. The deputy read the next part. He explained the distance rule. He explained no contact. He explained that a court date had been set and where. She tried to speak over him. He waited. He finished the sentence like a man who knows the power of finishing a sentence. "This isn't fair," she said. Her voice went high at the end, like a girl who had been told to apologize and still could not find the word sorry. "Fairness is time and in paper," I said, because I could not help myself. "You had both." She looked at me then. Her eyes went wide. If she had been the person I used to hope she was, there would have been horror there or shame. There was neither. There was calculation and the glint that comes when someone realizes their performance needs a new script. She turned away from the deputy and pulled out her phone. I thought she would call a lawyer. She called my son. I could hear the sobs start from where I stood. They were professional sobs, built from practice. The deputy waited. I stood with the pink paper in my hand and felt the sun move on my face. I kept my own phone in my bag. I did not need to call anyone. The court date would call me. The process would call me. The small engine turning under justice would call all of us. I heard her say his name over and over. I heard her say mine. I heard the way she tried to braid together fear and love with a thin thread and expected it to hold. It holds when no one tests it. It does not hold in daylight with a deputy reading from a sheet. When the deputy finished, he tipped his hat a fraction and turned back to his car. He had the easy walk of a man who carried other people's storms for a living and did not let them soak through. I stood a moment longer. The lawn machine scent grew heavy as the sun hit the clipped blades. I glanced down at the pink copy. I read my name and hers. I read the distance rule again. I slid the paper into the red leather folder. It made the same quiet sound. My bag felt heavier and right at my side. My phone buzzed before I reached my door. One buzz, then another. I did not look until I was in my kitchen with the door closed and the kettle back on the stove, a reflex now. My locket lay cool on my skin. The oak table waited for the next set of papers. I opened the phone. There were 3 missed calls from my son and one from a number without a name. Under them sat a single message. Plain black text on gray, no punctuation she had not earned. She sent me a single text. "You'll regret this." 1 more week had passed. The courthouse air ran cool over my face and dried my lips. It smelled like dust and old books and the faint soap from the bathrooms down the hall. I wore my calm suit and my low shoes. My silver locket lay flat and cold against my skin. I sat at the table with my red leather folder in front of me. I laid my palms on it to keep my hands still. Across the aisle, she sat with a lawyer I did not know. She wore a pale dress and the same sunglasses she had worn on the lawn, even under lights. The deputy had told her to remove them. She did, slow, as if she could control the room with delay. "You cannot." The bailiff called our case. We stood. My attorney nodded once, the way he did before we signed anything important. I looked at the judge and saw a face that had seen 1,000 storms and knew most of them would pass if you nailed the windows and waited. I held that thought. Waiting is its own work. My attorney opened the red leather folder and set things in order. The lab report went on top. The manager's certification, the chain of custody page, the photo with the twin flutes on the linen, the condensation rings like ghost coins, the printed messages with her line to her friend, the USB. He announced each item and marked the page numbers as if he were stacking boxes on a dock. Her lawyer stood. He moved like a man who preferred soft rooms and private calls. "Your Honor," he said, "this is a family dispute spun into accusation. My client denies any wrongdoing. The video is unclear. The messages are out of context." The judge lifted a hand, simple as a door closing. "We will see the evidence." The bailiff brought the evidence bag from the property room. The plastic made a small crackle that traveled through me like a wire hum. The champagne flute sat inside with my bag number label. The clerk read the numbers into the record. The judge examined the seal and nodded. The bailiff handed up the screen and played the video segment. The routine noise of the restaurant filled the room, thin and distant. The lens looked down without affection. It saw hands and glasses and the cold shine of the bar. It saw her cover the rim and dip. It saw the bartender's back turned. It saw me later move the glasses. It saw the 2 flutes sit like a choice. "Pause," the judge said. The screen froze. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Hale, you requested the lab to test the glass you held?" "Yes," I said. My voice stayed steady. "I secured it. I brought it to the hospital. I asked for a tox screen under my name, and the chain of custody began there." The judge turned to the report. He read the technician's initials, the machine model, the numbers that did not bend. He looked at the messages. He looked at the date stamps. He looked at the audio log where her whisper came through, low and sharp, "Tonight's the night." He asked a simple question that felt like a step on a stable stair. "Did you send this message, Miss Cassie Hale?" He used her full name. She flinched at the sound. Her lawyer started to object. The judge shook his head. She swallowed. She said she could not recall. My attorney asked to admit the phone carrier verification. The judge allowed it. Paper met paper, dates met dates. Inside me, something unwound. Not joy, not even relief, just a knot I had been holding loosened one turn. Then my phone buzzed inside my bag. I had silenced it, but the vibration crawled like an insect. My hand did not move. The judge's clerk handed up a slip. The judge read it, then looked at me. Mrs. Hale, you obtained a temporary protective order, correct? Yes. Was there contact after service? Yes. I kept it simple. A text. Do you have it? Yes. I slid my phone across to my attorney. He laid it beside the folder. The judge read the single line. Then he looked at her. He spoke gently like a teacher before a long summer. Ma'am, that text is contact. It violates the temporary order. You will not do that again. Her mouth opened. Her lawyer touched her wrist, a quick leash. Your Honor, he said. She was distraught. We all are, the judge said. That is why we have orders. The voice carried no heat and carried weight anyway. Her lawyer tried one last turn. He asked to exclude the video as prejudicial. He asked to delay. He asked for counseling instead of court. He asked for soft things. The judge looked at the table where the evidence sat, patient and exact. Then he looked at me, then at my attorney, and then at her. Power is not noise. It is paper, time, and a hand that knows when to lift the pen. The judge lifted his. He wrote. He spoke for the record. He granted the protective order with conditions. He set limits on approach and on contact. He added a note about the child and in exchange times, he gave a date for the next hearing and requested the detective's report from the criminal side. Her lawyer leaned in to speak to her. She stared at the frozen frame of the flutes as if the glasses could tell a different story if she looked long enough. They could not. The clerk stamped the order. The bailiff took the papers to be copied. My attorney gathered the items into the red leather folder and closed it with a soft click. The room felt airless, then light. We stood. We left. In the doorway, I heard a choked sound behind me and kept walking. In the hall, the cool air touched my face like a cloth. The judge set the next date and signed the order. By nightfall, the house felt like a harbor in bad weather. The wind pressed the shrubs against the siding in soft bursts. The kitchen held its lemon-clean smell. The oak table stood where it always had, 4 feet from the hutch, 2 feet from the chair where my grandson loved to swing his feet. I set the red leather folder on the table and opened it. The stamped order lay on top. Beneath it rested my copies of the amended trust, the bank statements, the manager's certification, the chain of custody page, the photo, the printed texts. The flash drive sat in its sleeve. The folder's weight felt like a hand at the small of my back telling me to stand up straight. Headlights moved across the window glass. The light went long and then broke. My son came in with a small duffel. It smelled like baby detergent and the sweet plastic of a car seat. His face looked carved down to the important parts. He set the bag by the door. He looked at the table. He looked at me. He did not cry. He did not have room for it. She called me from the courthouse hallway, he said. His voice had sand in it. She said, you lied. Then she said, the judge doesn't like you. Then she said, I'm sorry. You don't need to hear it. I have heard worse in my life, I said. It came out true and plain. I touched my locket to steady my own breath. Sit, eat something, read what you need. He washed his hands and sat. He held the order. He read it once, then again. He put his finger on the line about the child and the exchange times. He nodded as if counting steps. Then he pushed the order aside and opened the bank envelope I had tucked under the folder. The cashier's check slid out, face up. The number sat there, clean. The memo line read, household security. He stared at that and then at me. What do you want me to do with this? Pay what needs paying, I said. Change the locks. Get a camera. Buy groceries without looking at the cheaper bread. Call the therapist you like. Keep receipts. Build a paper trail as if your life depends on it because parts of it do. He let out a breath I had not known he was holding. He ran a hand over his face. She says I'm taking your side. You are taking your son's side, I said. You are taking the side of the person who could not choose the family he arrived to. You are taking your own side. Mine is sturdy. It will hold. He looked at the photo of the two identical flutes. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were older. I should have seen it, he said. No, I said. You were busy living. That's what the rest of us count on when we break rules. We count on good people being busy. We count on them being tired. A car slowed outside and then kept going. The wind made a new sound. My grandson padded in from the hallway with his stuffed bear under his arm. He smelled like soap and the faint sugar from the cereal he had stolen before bedtime. He climbed into my lap as if the day had not been shaped like a blade. He pressed his warm head under my chin. My locket touched his hair and cooled me down. My son watched us. He stood. He went to the door. He brought in the duffel and set it by the stair. He swallowed and worked his jaw. He looked at the oak table and the red leather folder and the pink copy of the order, and then he looked at me. He did not whisper. He did not make it a secret. He said a clear sentence and let it stand. He said, we're staying here for now. Morning brought a sky so clear it felt like the air had been washed. The house smelled like coffee and the faint lemon that lives in my cupboards. The kettle clicked on the stove and whispered as it heated. I set the red leather folder on the counter while I made my list for the day. The paper under my pencil made a dry, patient sound. I wrote down calls to return. I wrote down a note to check the mailbox for the certified copy of the order. I wrote down lilacs because the bush in the yard had put out a few late blooms and I wanted them on my table. I took the folder to the hall closet where the fireproof safe sat on the shelf. The safe's metal was cool and smooth under my hands. The dial turned with a soft scrape. I opened it and smelled that sealed air that always reminds me of new books. Inside lay what I had told myself I would never need. The deed, the life insurance, the letters my husband wrote me the first year we were married. I slid the lab report in. I slid the manager's certification and the chain of custody page in. I set the printed texts in the photo behind them. I placed the updated trust documents on the top and behind them the copy of the order. The USB went in last in a small plastic sleeve tucked at the back like a seed. I closed the door and turned the dial. The lock caught with a clean, satisfying stop. The house felt steadier. It was not magic. It was paper and metal and heat-resistant foam and time. It was what people like me build when they do not want to live by weather. I took the kettle off the flame and poured water over tea leaves. Steam rose and carried the warm, tannic smell up. I set my silver locket aside for a second and rubbed the chain between my fingers to dislodge a tiny knot. Then I put it back on. It lay cool and right where it belonged. My phone buzzed. A voicemail waited from a number the court had coded for victim services. The woman spoke calm and clear. She explained the next steps. She said I had done the right things. She asked if I needed anything. I did not in the way she could give. But I saved the number. I like to know where doors are. I set plates on the oak table. I put out the jam my grandson liked and the butter he would not touch but would push around with his knife. I set 3 forks and 3 knives placed so straight that the light caught their edges. I washed the late lilacs and shook them over the sink. They smelled green and sweet. I tucked them into a jar and set it by the window where the sun could pick out the soft purple. The day moved on like a careful train. My son came down the stairs with a laundry basket under his arm and a look that said he had slept like a rock for the first time in weeks. He went out to change the lock on the back door. Metal clicked and chirped. My grandson lined up his toy cars along the grout line and announced a race. The house made the small private sounds that mean safety. The hum of the fridge, the whistle of the kettle as it cooled, the soft thud of the dryer turning. I took the pink copy of the order from the red leather folder and put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a pear. I wrote the court date on the top in my plain hand. I wrote a second line. Make soup. I have found that soup fixes more than it should. It fills the room with a smell that tells the body it can rest. As I set the pot on the stove, someone knocked. It was a friendly knock, not a pushy one. 3 knocks with space between them. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the door. I checked the side window. because old habits keep you safe. Outside stood my neighbor with a dish covered by a clean white cloth and a smile that had no questions in it. The sight made my throat tight, the way good things do. I unlocked the deadbolt and the knob and opened the door. I opened my door without fear. Where is the line between family loyalty and self-defense in a case like this? How would you defend yourself in a situation like this? Please let me know in the comments.
My grandma told me this story. I have many more stories. Subscribe so you don't miss the most interesting things.